Thinking about travelling to Portugal, whether it's Lisbon's lively streets, Porto's riverfront charm, or the golden beaches of the Algarve, Portugal has so much to offer first-time visitors. In this episode, I'm joined by Portugal expert Julie Fox to share her insider tips on when to go, how to plan your itinerary, and the experiences you simply cannot miss.
Welcome to the Global Travel Planning Podcast. Your host is founder of the Global Travel Planning website, Tracy Collins. Each week, Tracy is joined by expert guests as she takes you on a journey to destinations around the world, sharing travel inspiration, itinerary ideas, and practical tips to help you plan your next adventure. Join us as we explore everywhere from bustling cities to remote landscapes, uncover cultural treasures, and discover the best ways to make your travel dreams a reality.
Hi and welcome to the Global Travel Planner Podcast. Today we're setting our sights on Portugal, a country of dramatic coastlines, rolling vineyards, colourful cities and a relaxed pace of life that is a way of capturing travellers' hearts. By the end of today's episode, you'll know the best times to visit, how to plan your itinerary, the easiest ways to get around, what to eat and drink, and some hidden gems that first-time visitors often miss. Now, to help us uncover the best of Portugal, I'm joined by Julie Fox, a British writer and creator of Julie Dawn Fox in Portugal. Julie has lived in central Portugal since 2007 and brings years of local knowledge and on-the-ground experience. So, Julie, to kick us off, can you introduce yourself, tell us a little about your website and share what inspired you to begin helping travellers explore Portugal?
Yes, so thank you, Tracy. My name is Julie Dawn Fox, full name, but I actually just go by Julie. And I moved to Portugal in 2007. I can't even get my dates right. So 2007. And in 2010, I decided I wanted to start practicing writing. I wasn't quite sure in what capacity I wanted to write. But then I started a blog, and then I decided that my blog needed a focus. And so the kind of general wisdom at the time was write about something that you're interested in. And because Portugal was still quite new to me, I love traveling. I was still noticing things that were different for me as a foreigner living in Portugal. And so these were kind of curiosities to me, some things I didn't like, some things I loved, some things I was just like, oh, that's unusual. And so these became the topics of my blog, Julie Dawn Fox in Portugal. Over the years, obviously I've become more and more used to things in Portugal, so the differences don't strike me necessarily as much. And my true passion has always been the travel. So that's how the blog's kind of evolved over the years. It really is very much about helping other people explore Portugal and to get off the beaten track, because at the time when I first started this, there really wasn't much information about places other than Lisbon and Porto and Sintra, perhaps, in English, or at least what was in English was in this kind of badly translated from flowery Portuguese, so it was barely intelligible kind of English. So back then it was very important, I think, to give people that kind of information.
Oh, that's perfect. So now, obviously, you've had the website for quite a few years now, and it's developed and grown. And now you have services as well. You actually help, as well as having the website, you do also help people who are planning to visit Portugal.
Yeah. So after a while, when I first started writing, it was more about this is what I did, my experiences. And then I kind of realized that actually to help other people, I needed to kind of speak to them and say, well, if you want to do this, then, you need to be looking at this. And so people started writing in and saying, can you help me plan my trip? What should I do here? And so it became too much to sort of, to handle, answer every single email. So I started developing services. And so I do one-on-one travel consultations to help people who are happy to book their own travel, but, they've got gaps in their itinerary. Some of them already have quite a detailed plan, some haven't got a clue, and some have just got so much information from friends, families, websites, YouTube videos, God knows what, and they're just overwhelmed. So, yeah, and then another thing that I do is I work with a local travel agent, and so we kind of co-create itineraries, and then once the client is happy with the plan, then the travel agent actually books everything for them and manages the trip and looks after them while they're there. So, and then I started doing digital products, ready-made itineraries that people can just purchase and follow. I started doing that a couple of years ago as well. So
perfect. So lots of good things on your website, lots of ways that you can help people that are planning a trip. Now, I'm just thinking about listeners who may not know much about Portugal beyond, say, Lisbon and the Algarve or Porto. But how would you describe the country's kind of overall vibe and appeal?
Okay, so the overall vibe and appeal is that it's very friendly. Well, it's one thing that people usually remark on is how friendly people are. And also we get, well, this varies from region to region, but sort of as a generalization, we get a lot of sunshine, especially when you compare it to the UK, for example, where we're both from, so we both know how wet it can be. So it's also very varied. And I don't think people realise that. So you can get, even within a small geographical area, you've got everything from beach, mountains, rivers, lakes, you've got sort of historical monuments, etc. So, you don't actually have to travel very far within Portugal to see a lot and have a lot of different experiences.
Oh, fabulous. So in light of that, could you give us a sense of Portugal's geography and regional variety, so that the different landscapes and climates and kind of cultural influences?
Yeah, sure. So starting from the north, which, if I'm honest, is probably my favourite region. Well, it's really hard to choose. But anyway, let's just say I love the north of Portugal, possibly because it gets more rain than some of the other areas. So consequently, it is greener. And I think that's what draws me. But also, it's very rich in traditions and culture. So there's a part, the sort of northwest part is known as the Minho region, and there's loads of really beautiful small towns, villages, small cities. It's on the Camino de Santiago pilgrim trail, which I've walked sort of several different routes from Porto. So again, it's very dear to my heart because I've spent a lot of time actually exploring it on foot. And then in the east, you've got the Pena National Park. It's the only national park in the country. And so there's lots of, little villages and, beautiful countryside. And then you've got Porto, which is the major city, and the Douro Valley, which is the most famous of Portugal's many wine regions. It's certainly not the only wine region in Portugal. And also the coastline there is quite sort of, there's a lot of unspoilt coastline and undeveloped. And so then we've got central Portugal. So that's actually a really big region, very varied. The tourism board markets it as a country within a country, which is quite valid because, you really have got, you've got UNESCO World Heritage Monuments, you've got the highest mountain in mainland Portugal, and sort of various different mountain ranges. You've got several wine regions, including the Dow and the Bairrada, which they produce spumante, which is like the equivalent of champagne or Prosecco or whatever. And you've got the major city of Coimbra. You've got loads of historical villages, schist villages in the mountains, medieval villages near the Spanish border, and just amazing coastline. It's just, there's just so much to explore. Incredible caves, just all sorts. Then you kind of coming down, working north to south here. So then you kind of reach the Lisbon area. And to be honest, you could spend 2 weeks in Lisbon and just sort of like within an hour or an hour and a half of Lisbon, again, you've got natural parks, you've got Sintra, which is kind of full of fairy tale palaces and things like that. You've got amazing beaches. You've got prehistoric sites. You've got sort of stunning beaches to the south of Lisbon, hiking trails, all sorts. More wine regions as well. So
Wow.
at least three wine regions I can think of off the top of my head, including one that does Moscatel wine. So it's kind of fortified. It's a bit different from port wine. Very, very nice. Then you've got the whole swathe of Portugal in between sort of Lisbon and then the Algarve, and that's the Alentejo region. Also, this is one of the best wine regions in Portugal. So the Douro and the Alentejo are the kind of most famous, and they really are they deserve the fame. But you've got kind of rolling plains, cork oak forests, stone pine forests. Again, sort of towards the Spanish border, you've got lots of medieval villages with like the remains of castles and things. You've got the major city of Évora with Roman heritage, prehistoric monuments. There's a bit of it's not Stonehenge, but there's a stone circle, double stone circle. So that's fascinating if you're into archaeology and history. But then you've got a whole coastline as well, which is absolutely beautiful. It's completely different from, say, the Algarve region. Lots of little coves, dramatic cliffs, rock formations, fishing villages. And that is kind of, there's a whole hiking trail called the Rota Vicentina, which starts about, let's say, a couple of hours south of Lisbon in Sines, and then goes all the way, you can go all the way down the sort of coast of Portugal into the Algarve region, and then across the bottom to Lagos. So that is, if you wanted to see the countryside and really literally get off the beaten track, then that would be one way of doing it. Okay, but if you're not into hiking, there's still. Am I going on too long?
No. You've had you asked about hiking. I hate hiking. You're like, no, hiking, no. I'm into drinking port though. Just say that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the Algarve region. I mean, that's one of the most famous parts of Portugal, especially for Brits. It's sun and sand. So, you get a lot of package holiday makers coming to the central part of coastal Algarve. And that is quite a built-up area. But you get away from that to the east or the west. You've got smaller towns, especially if you go inland. There's still, the coastline is really varied from west to east. So you've got the beautiful postcard beaches around Lagos and in the centre of Portugal, but then you've got more wilder, dramatic coastline on the west. And you've got the Rio Formosa Nature Reserve, which has lots of little islands and sandbanks and stuff towards the east. Again, if you go into the hills, then you've got a completely different, much more rural, more authentic kind of aspect to the region. And then we've got the islands. So you've got Madeira, which actually has two islands. I haven't been to the second one, but the Madeira Island, the bigger one, again, that's really varied for such a small island. It's volcanic, so it's got really dramatic mountains and valleys and it's very lush. It's subtropical, semi-tropical kind of climate, lots and lots of flowers. It has a flower festival in May. and slightly different food from the mainland Portugal, different cuisines. The famous drink is poncha, which is quite sort of strong, so just be careful. Even though it's got fruit juice in it, it's quite potent. Yeah, what else? As with most of the islands, so you've got the Azores Islands as well, and that's a kind of archipelago of 9 islands. With pretty much all of them, I'd say the north tends to be wilder, more lush, more full of vegetation than the south. The south tends to get more sun, and kind of general rule of thumb, and also then tends to be the more built areas. But for any of the sort of, whether you go to Madeira or any of the Azores Islands, there's less in terms of, must-see sites. It's more for nature, natural beauty, outdoor activities, that kind of thing, than, going to see your history, culture, your UNESCO monuments, that kind of thing. There are a couple, but, that's not the main draw. So, yeah.
Wow, so there's a lot to Portugal. And I have to say, for the first time ever, I went this year. I'd never been to Portugal. And I'm a bit embarrassed to say, but we only actually managed to get to Lisbon and Porto. But I'm still glad that we actually managed to kind of experience a small little bit of what Portugal has to offer, because obviously there's a huge amount. So if somebody's arriving for the first time, and obviously I was a first-time visitor this year in March when I went, what sort of things should we know about Portugal?
I'd say that for, you need to know that it may look like a small country, especially if you're coming from somewhere like the US or from Australia, where you've got vast expanses. That even though Portugal looks tiny on a map, it actually takes quite a long time to travel around, no matter which, whether you're driving or using public transport. So for that reason, I strongly recommend that you don't try to cover too much ground on one trip. It's something that a lot of people do underestimate. Also, that, there's very often a wonderful, lesser-known alternative to the main sort of sites. So, for example, in Sintra, Pena Palace is the colourful palace that appears on all of the postcards, all of the promo and stuff. But to be honest, it's very overcrowded, and I don't recommend it anymore. So, but there's plenty of other alternatives. You could go to Queluz Palace, which is also part of the Sintra Parks and Palaces, and there's hardly anyone there. And it's stunning. And, you can wander around at will and, see all the amazing tiles and the landscape gardens and stuff. And, yeah, you just got...
I wish I'd spoken to you before I went to Portugal in March.
Did you go to Pena Palace?
I did. Not overly impressed, I shall have to tell you. But yes, I should have spoken to you before I went. Are there any common misconceptions you think that people have about Portugal that you'd like to kind of address?
Yeah, I'd say some people still believe that Portugal is a cheap destination, which is not really true anymore. I mean, you can travel on a budget, that's true. And I do believe that Portugal offers great value for money, but it's not cheap. In fact, I was talking to my physio the other day, and she was like, Portuguese people can't afford to travel in Portugal. They end up going abroad because hotel prices really have gone up. I mean, in the time that I've been living here, I've seen the prices go way, way up. So again, everything's relative. So it depends on where you're coming from, how much you're used to paying for things. And for a lot of visitors from countries like, the US or the UK or whatever, especially eating out can still be really affordable. And it is one of the great pleasures of being in Portugal. Wine is also very cheap. So, it's not all like super expensive, but it's just, it's not a low cost country, not if you want to enjoy the best it has to offer. So there's that. And then also, people think that the only wine region in Portugal is in the Douro Valley, because that's the only one they hear about. And it's just, well, it's not true. There's 27 wine regions, and all of which obviously have something different to offer, different terroir, and so different grapes and different flavours. And also that the Algarve is where you go if you want to go to the beach. Well, if you think about Portugal, half of its border is coast. So, pretty much anywhere in the country, you've got amazing beaches. So you can save yourself an awful lot of travel time if you focus on beaches that are closer to where you actually want to stay.
And is there a best time of year to visit Portugal? We were there in March, actually, and we had a lot of rain. I will say it wasn't too cold, but we did have a lot of rain. But is there a best time of year to visit, or a time of year to avoid Portugal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with climate change, seasons are changing. There's no kind of guarantee anymore of, sort of, okay, if you come at this time of year, this is the weather you're likely to get. And there's not really much of a shoulder season these days. So I would say I would personally avoid July and August and any other time when it's European school holidays or anybody's school holidays, frankly, because, prices go up, it's crowded, and it's, in my opinion, too hot to enjoy sightseeing unless you manage to find an air-conditioned museum or whatever for the afternoon period, especially. Mornings you can just about get away with it, but in the afternoon it's just too hot to be outside quite often. So I would avoid those periods. If you don't mind a bit of rain, then I actually would say come, March or April, October, November. In fact, to be honest, I prefer travelling in the off season. So the whole kind of span from October through to April, for me, is the better time. I like hiking. I know you don't, but so for me, it gets too hot after sort of May. It's just too hot for hiking. But just generally wandering around. I like bumbling around little villages and sort of, getting lost in cities and things as well. And all of that is just much more enjoyable, not to mention more affordable when it's not too hot.
Mm. Now, for first-time visitors, deciding where to go is actually quite tricky. And I have to say, when Doug and I were sitting thinking, where should we go? The obvious places just jumped out were kind of Lisbon and Porto. So that's where we chose to go. But where would you kind of recommend as first-time visitors that would be a good idea to kind of possibly include in their itinerary?
Okay, well, I do think, you definitely didn't do wrong by choosing Lisbon and Porto. I mean, they are the biggest cities. There's a lot to see and do. And, they have their own identity and their own sort of feel. And they are quite different cities, I'm sure you'll agree. Mm. But I'd say that if you could include, and if you were just coming for like 7 to 10 days, I wouldn't try to go much beyond either of those cities. I would try and do something in between rather than kind of extending further north or further south. So what you might want to do is maybe incorporate some stops between Lisbon and Porto. And because if you wanted another city, for example, then you could stop in Coimbra, which has a UNESCO World Heritage university. It was the first capital of Portugal. So there's lots of history there. It's also really pretty. It's on a river and kind of, it's just a nice Instagrammable place as well. But there's also lots of smaller places. So if you wanted to kind of, balance your big cities with smaller towns, then there are places you can visit that are far less touristy. There's Caldas da Rainha, for example, which is famous for its ceramics. And it doesn't have any major sites. It does have a ceramics museum and a very, very pretty park. But and a fruit and flowers market in the main square every morning. and it's close to some really lovely beaches. You've got Peniche, which has got amazing rock formations, Obidos, which is quite well known as a medieval village, and it's quite convenient if you're on that route between Lisbon and Porto. And what else? Alcobaça, a lovely little town, dominated by another UNESCO World Heritage Monastery. This time it's Cistercian, so it's like 13th century. Really beautiful, absolutely stunning stonework in there, and a legend around it as well. But the town itself is really, really nice and calm. And apart from the monastery, there's not really, again, no major sites, but it can make a nice base if you want that smaller town feel, because most visitors come in, go to the monastery, go away again. So if you stay overnight and use that as a base to explore that part of central Portugal, then it's really, really nice.
Oh, so if somebody has 7 to 10 days, what would you recommend? I'm just thinking Doug and I were there. I think we had a week, and we were 4 days in Lisbon, and then we went up to Porto for 3 days. We did have ongoing plans, but there was a potential train strike in Spain, so we ended up flying to Barcelona rather than what we had planned to do. And we did that by public transport. So I'm kind of interested if you did sort of, where would you recommend for 7 days? And then also kind of getting around. We took the trains. We did use public transport. We found it quite easy to get around that way, but there aren't a lot of trains in Portugal, which Doug was a bit disappointed about. But yeah, so what would you say for a kind of 7 day to get a good feel for what Portugal has to offer?
Yeah, I'd say for 7 days, actually, you probably did. Again, if you like cities, then what you did is ideal. And, I think you need 4 days minimum in Lisbon, especially if you're going to do a day trip to Sintra, or if you want to skip Sintra because you feel it's too busy, although there are lots of different ways of experiencing Sintra. So, a minimum 3 days actually in Lisbon and 1 4-day trip. And then the train, which takes about 3 hours to get to Porto. And then that gives you 2 full days in Porto, more or less, or 1.5 days, depending on your flight times. And then a day trip either to the Douro Valley, for example, which is a very common day trip, or you could, there's plenty of others. You could take the train to another city like Guimarães, beautiful medieval, full of wonderful squares and things like that, or Braga, or a smaller town. So there's lots of places you can easily get to by train from Porto. So I think using those 2 cities as a base is certainly not a bad idea for your first trip. And also, if for example, you can do a lot by public transport on your own, but if you wanted to do a small group tour as a day trip, then being based in those cities is going to give you much more flexibility, because if you choose a base outside those cities, then you don't get the small group tour options because there's just not enough people to make it viable for the tour operators. So then you're kind of limited to either having a car or having a private guide and driver, which obviously makes things a lot more expensive. So yeah, if you've got like a few days, if you've got 10 days, for example, then I would say it may be worth, if you're happy to drive, to actually pick up a rental car in Lisbon and then spend 3 days exploring, taking your time over getting to Porto, and then drop the car once you arrive in Porto, because you really don't want to be driving in either of those cities. But having a car in the central part will give you a lot more flexibility and enable you to make the most of your time instead of waiting for trains and buses and things.
I will say I think what disappointed Doug with the trains was the fact that we couldn't get very easily from Seville to Lisbon because there's no train line, which we can't believe there's no train line between those two. So we ended up taking a coach, which actually worked fine. So we did kind of manage to get around all right. And we found that the public transport was really not a problem whatsoever. And we did exactly as you said. We took a day tour out to Sintra from Lisbon. We didn't in Porto. We just kind of explored Porto itself. I didn't get a chance, unfortunately, go and try some of the different port are the distilleries, is that what they're called?
The port wine houses.
That's it, yeah.
Because it's the cellars. They actually they transport the port from the wineries in the Douro and they store them in the cellars in Villanova de Gaia, which is just across the river from Porto.
Yeah, so that's on my list for next time. I tell you, I didn't get a chance to do it. Now, what about etiquette tips or cultural norms that visitors should be aware of? Because there's always something that catches new people out.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you go to a restaurant, and you've probably experienced this already, you'll notice that the waiters, the servers, might bring dishes of olives or bread, or maybe even cured meats, maybe an octopus salad or something like that to the table without you asking. A lot of people don't realise that these are not freebies. And so if you don't want to eat them, it's perfectly okay. Just sort of send them back untouched and you won't be charged. But if you want to eat them, just check. I mean, the bread and olives are usually really cheap and, you don't usually need to check the price. But the ones with meat in or octopus or anything like that, they can actually rack up your bill quite quickly. So if, don't feel uncomfortable about asking the price before you tuck in, because at the end of the day, you're paying for it. So, so there's that. And also, well, whether you're traveling with kids or not, you might be surprised to find that the majority of restaurants in Portugal are quite welcoming of children, and even at dinner time. So it's really not unusual to see kids in restaurants at night, whereas you might not be used to that in your home country. The same goes for activities at night. If there's a concert or something like that, then again, it's not unusual to see quite small children who you think that's way past their bedtime, but it's really not. They kind of stay up late, especially when they're on holiday. It's not unusual to see kids out at midnight. So yeah, it's Portugal's a very child-friendly country, but also if you are traveling with young children, it's not that easy to find babysitting services. So just take your kids with you.
That's a good tip there. Now, what about, because I always get asked this about tipping and how to greet people and how to order in cafes. We get asked that about the UK all the time. So what about in Portugal? What do I do when I go into a cafe, and am I expected to tip?
Okay, so a cafe, if you walk into a shop, then it's always nice, especially if it's an independent shop, not one of the sort of chain stores. But anyway, if you see an attendant or a shop assistant or whatever, then it's just polite to kind of, make eye contact and say bom dia, which is good morning, or boa tarde, which is good afternoon. And then even if you don't buy anything, if you just have a little browse and you want to walk out again, then again saying obrigada, which is thank you, or adeus, which is goodbye. It's just polite, people appreciate that. In a cafe, most of the time cafes are table service. However, some places, especially if you want to eat outside on the terrace, sometimes if it says pre-pagamento, there'll be a sign, so you need to go in and pay at the bar. And so shops and pastry counters, things like that, look out for a ticket machine, because a lot of places, they have a senha, which is a ticket thing. So if you don't know that, you could be waiting forever and never get served. But it's actually quite good, because I remember years and years ago I went to haberdashery in Coimbra, and I wasn't really aware of this senha system. And there's these kind of little old ladies, and they've got very sharp elbows, and they were kind of and I'm thinking, why aren't I getting served? And these kind of like little old ladies kind of like flashing me around. So yeah, it's if there's a senya, and also then sometimes in these cafes or even places like this, you get given, you don't pay at the counter, not always. So sometimes you might be given like a blank, a credit card, blank one, or a piece of slip of paper, and you take that to the cashier, usually situated by the door. So yeah.
And tipping?
Oh yeah, tipping, right. So tipping, it's not essential. As in, sort of some countries, it's definitely part of the eating out situation. In Portugal, waiters do get paid at least minimum wage. However, tipping is appreciated. Of course, it is. No one's going to get offended if you tip. Amounts vary. So you could, in a cafe or something like, or a bar, where the value is not particularly high, you might just round up to the next, sort of €5 or €10, depending on how much it is. In a restaurant, I'd say 10% is a kind of a good average. If it's a little bit less, no one's going to get upset. If it's a little bit more, no one's going to get upset. So if you use 10%-ish as your rule of thumb, if you want to pay more, you can. It's up to you.
Okay, perfect. That really easily segues into one of my favorite topics to talk about, and that is food. And I did try some very lovely food when I was in Portugal, which I probably cannot name, but I just know it was very tasty. But what local dishes and drinks should somebody try when they go to Portugal?
Okay. Possibly the most famous and essential food to try, if you've got a sweet tooth at least, is the pastel de nata, which is the custard tarts. They are absolutely divine. The pastry case is flaky and crispy, and then the custardy inside is quite sort of creamy. If you get a good one, so if they're a day old, then the case loses its crisp, and the inside can be a bit lumpy. So you need to go somewhere where they have enough turnover that they are constantly churning out sort of fresh batches. If you get one that's still warm, it's divine. Mm-hmm. So the actual recipe originates from the monastery in Belém, which is in a district of Lisbon. So the Geronimo's monastery, they patented the recipe. So there's only one cafe or bakery in Belém that's allowed to call these custard tarts the Pastel de Belém. Everyone else, and they say they have a secret recipe. Everyone else can only call it a pastel de nata, which means cream tart. It's pretty much the same thing. I don't really understand what the secret could be. But if you want to do a taste test, then there are plenty of opportunities for you to try and find your best pastel de nata or pastel de Belém, and you can compare and contrast and make your own judgment. So that's for the sweet tooth. There are lots and lots of other amazing Portuguese cakes. They may not look very very kind of exciting, but there's one, queijada, which is queijo means cheese, so it's sort of it's made from cheese, but it doesn't taste overly cheesy. In fact, a lot of Portuguese cakes can be quite sugary, so this one I like because it's not too sweet. Other things, let's see, I did make a kind of list I was going to just to remind myself. So Serra de Estrela cheese. So the cheese in Portugal, that usually comes in a round, so you can have it sort of solid, cured, some of it's kind of rock hard, but really, really tasty. My favourite is the slightly runny stuff. And so you can actually scoop it out with a spoon. It's so good. And so there are two kinds of that runny cheese that you might encounter. In the Lisbon area, it's probably you're more likely to find azeitão cheese, which is a variation of this runny sheep's cheese. But Azeitão is just south of Lisbon, so that's why it's more available. In the centre of Portugal, this cheese originates from the Serra de Estrela, the mountains, and so they've got their own kind. So you need the amanteigada, which is sort of buttery texture, but just give it a squeeze in the supermarket. If it feels squidgy, then it's probably, and leave it out at room temperature before you kind of eat it, and hopefully you'll get some that's scoopable. Then when you come to sort of meat and fish, I like a naco na pedra, which is steak on a stone. And so it comes pretty much raw. It might be seared, but then it's on a hot stone, so you can continue to cook it as long as you want or not. Polvo alagareiro means polvo is octopus. Alagareiro means kind of it's essentially in the oven, roasted with potatoes, olive oil, and garlic, and it is delicious. And then bacalhau is salted cod. So every restaurant, apart from vegetarian ones, will have some form of bacalhau on the menu. I like it with broa, which is cornbread, and it's usually got a layer of grelos, which is kind of a leafy green. It's quite bitter, but it's nice when it's combined with the fish and the cornbread. And then drinks-wise, obviously you've got the whole gamut of Portuguese wines, which you have to try. There's a growing kind of craft beer industry, which is compared to some countries, it's still relatively young, but it's growing. They do have some great beers. But liqueurs, I really absolutely love licor beirão, which is from the central region. It used to be something that your granny drank. And it was originally sold as a medicinal cure-all because it's got lots of herbs in it. And obviously, I don't think that it has much medicinal value, to be perfectly honest. But it does taste really nice if you like that kind of, herby kind of liqueur. And the marketing, they've done an excellent job on marketing, so it's really popular. You'll find it at festivals. It's now more of a kind of a trendy drink, and you can get lots of cocktails with it in as well. And another liqueur that I really love is ginginha, and that is made from sour cherries, and it is often served in a little chocolate cup, which obviously you can eat that as well as, and it's there's lots of little kiosks in Lisbon where you can go. Say you go and have your lunch out or your dinner. Then to round off your meal, you go to a ginginha bar and go and have a little shot of sour cherry liqueur, and you can have it with or without the cherry so com with or sem without the cherry.
Yes, I had that. I did try that. I remember that. I definitely had Portuguese tarts for sure. And I definitely had the cherry liqueur in the chocolate cup, and it was delicious. I really liked it. I have to say that. Now, what about, I'm just thinking about, when you go to somewhere that you haven't been before, you don't speak the language, sometimes navigating the menu can be a bit of a kind of, difficult. You kind of think, what do I order? How do I order? So is there kind of ways to kind of navigate your way around a Portuguese menu?
Well, now with AI, you can do anything. So if you've got Google Lens app on your phone, then or ChatGPT or something like that, honestly, that's the easiest way because you can literally get a translation there and then. In a lot of the touristy places, there will be an English translation on the menu. It's only really when you go out to the smaller towns and villages that you won't find that. And if you go properly off the beaten path, I don't say there's an proper and an improper way to do that, but I mean, if you go really rural, then yes, you might actually be in restaurants where the servers don't necessarily speak English. And so this is where these tools could really come into their own. But one thing to look out for, and this sort of would help with budgeting as well, is in a lot of the traditional restaurants, the main dishes are actually usually big enough to share. And that's how Portuguese families economise when they go out for a meal. They'll instead of ordering one of these dishes for each person, if it's a table of 4, they may get 1 or 2 of these kind of like sharing dishes. And then, if you've had a starter and a dessert, that's probably enough. So if one of you wants one thing and one of you wants something else, look to see if there's a half portion, meia dos. So that would give you enough just for one person. In the city restaurants, a lot of them now, it's just, a portion is just designed for one person. So if you're not sure, then check. Just ask the waiter, will this do for one, or is it big enough for 2? There's no shame in that at all. So
no, Doug and I often share because we find that sometimes the portions are quite big, and that's a really good way as well to economise. Because obviously, if you're traveling, unless you're like mega loaded, we're all looking at ways that we can save a little bit of money, aren't we? So, what about if and things like how would you save money on things like experiences or even accommodation or getting around? Have you got any tips for kind of trying to help with anybody budgeting when they're traveling to Portugal?
Yeah, so I'd say that. Another way you can economise on food, for example, would be to look for a menu do dia, which means the menu of the day. So that's usually served at lunchtimes. It's a set menu. You might have some choice as to what your main or starter is going to be. It may or may not include a coffee and a dessert. Always check. You'll often get offered the menu or the dessert or the coffee, but just check. Está incluído? Is it included? Just to make sure you're not going to get a nasty surprise. But these menu do dia, they range between, depending on where you are, kind of €8-9 per person, up to €15-20, depending on where you are. And another way, obviously, if you want to economise or if you want more space, lots of reasons for choosing to stay in an apartment where you can go to the supermarket or the local market, cook your own meals, and especially if you've had a big menu do dia, you might not even want very much in the evening. So just having some bread and cheese and wine in your own space can save you a lot of money. So in terms of experiences and, entrance fees, things like that, Lisbon and Porto do have city cards. However, I'd say unless you're going to be really kind of hitting as many museums as you possibly can in whatever period of time you have the validity of the card for, they're not always the best value for money, although they do give you public transport as well. But I think before going, I'll have one of those, I would just do a little bit of research to see whether you're going to get the value out of it. If you're over 65, then a lot of places give you a discount, up to 50% on train travel. That's automatic. 65 over 65 discount, and also in monuments, museums, that kind of thing. So again, the Lisbon card, for example, may not be worth it for you if you are a senior. In terms of saving money on experiences apart from the entrance fees, then obviously small group tours are going to be cheaper than private tours. And so again, if you want to take advantage of those, you need to be based in a city. But then you've got the pros and cons of that. It's more expensive to stay in the city than it is in the smaller towns. So you have to weigh that up. But one thing I quite like doing, and we done this in various cities around the world, and including Lisbon, is to do one of the audio guided tours. We've got an app on our phone called the Voice Map, and you can just buy a tour. It's kind of self-paced, and so you can actually learn a lot, see a lot, get off the beaten track. And if you get bored of it, then you just give up. No one's going to get upset if you walk off. Whereas if you're on a group tour, you might feel a bit sort of like I've got to stay till the end. So yeah, so there's lots of things you can do to avoid spending a huge amount of money, as well as traveling off season, etc.
Yeah, when Doug and I were there, we stayed in a very lovely hotel in Lisbon, and then to budget a bit, we actually stayed in a really lovely apartment in Porto. So that worked really well. And of course, then we could go to the local supermarket, which was great, and also do some washing, which is always useful when you travel and to be able to have to do that. So we really enjoyed it. Both of those were really good, and we actually did a tour in Porto that I am sure was on a golf buggy. Does that sound about right for Porto? Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But even though we were there in March, Lisbon was still quite busy. Trying to get on the tram, that iconic tram that everybody wants to get on, was a bit. It was quite busy. So I can only imagine what it can be like in the summer when there's a lot of tourists arrive in the main cities, especially. I can imagine the Algarve as well. So if people planning a trip for the first time, what do you think could be like the biggest mistakes you see them doing when they're planning their trip to Portugal? And I know you help a lot of people plan their trip. So what are the things that you try to steer them away from doing?
Okay, so the biggest issue I see is trying to do too much and trying to cover too much ground. And so you'll have people who've got 7 days and they want to go to Lisbon, Porto, Douro Valley, Algarve, and maybe somewhere else, maybe Madeira. I mean, you know, and I'm laughing because I know that Madeira involves the flight. And so, yeah, it's way too much. You could easily, as I think I mentioned before, spend a week, even 2 weeks in Lisbon itself and just explore the surrounding areas and still have a very varied and amazing trip. Obviously, most people don't want to limit themselves to just that kind of small an area they want to sort of cover a bit more ground. So, yeah, I would say really just pick one or two places, not too far from each other, so you're not not wasting a day of your holiday in transit. And there's much better things you could be doing than sitting on a bus or driving or whatever. Although if you are going to let's say travel from Lisbon to Porto, you could take the train. But one way of maximising your time and that day, for example, would be to maybe have a driver, if your budget allows, have a driver to take you from Lisbon and take you to a couple of stops on the way to Porto. And that way you get the best of both worlds, without sort of having to do any backtracking or extra journeys. So think about those. Think about the alternatives to the must-do sites, and definitely be open to the idea that you don't have to travel all the way to the Algarve to get to a nice beach, that you don't have to go to the Douro Valley. It is a very picturesque wine region, but there are very many other wine regions. And just being realistic in terms of what you can achieve. So I would say decide what is the most important thing for you, not what your friends have said, not what your family has said, not what somebody else on the internet has said. For you and how you like to travel, the things that excite you, what is your must do for each day? And then treat that, so that is your main focus. Anything else that you manage to have time to see or do, or you stumble across, then that's an added bonus. So, I used to be guilty of trying to cram too much in as well. But I am learning to control myself a bit more and do this, like actually take this approach, okay, that's my thing. I've got these other sort of possibles on my list of, I could do this if time permits, but I've made peace with it's okay if I don't do that. Yeah, because you never know how long things are going to take. And and sort of punctuality in Portugal, it's not as bad as the reputation that Spain has, but some things don't always start on time. And, so even you can't have a very rigid packed schedule that, 10 o'clock I'm going to do this, 11 this, 12 this. It's not going to work. Your lunch is likely to take a long time if you have a proper sit down lunch. and that can throw your afternoon plans out. Just you need flexibility.
Yeah, one of the nice things that Doug and I experienced in March is actually we went with total flexibility. So we did do the trip to Sintra. We went to Pena Palace. I was a little bit disappointed. I'm upfront about that. So we did do that, but it was actually quite a nice day trip because we did see other things and other places, and as you said, the beaches, which were amazing. But I agree, we didn't feel that we didn't have a very packed schedule. We could kind of wander around and just take it in and enjoy it, and realize that actually we definitely want to go back to Portugal and explore it a little bit more. So for anybody who's visiting, what would be the number one tip that you would say to somebody? It's like, you need to know this if you come into Portugal.
I would say this is a very practical tip, and I would say bring non-slip comfortable shoes without high heels, because they're going to get stuck in the cracks in the cobblestones, or the cobblestones, they're very slippy even when it's dry. So sensible shoes, comfortable shoes, and layers, because the weather is changeable. And even in the summer, baking hot day, you still might want a shawl or a light cardigan or something if you're in a place that's got really strong air conditioning, or if the breeze picks up or something like that. So again, be flexible, not just with your time, but also with your wardrobe.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. And I also think be prepared to want to go back, because we definitely want to explore and see more of Portugal, that's for sure. Now, before we sign off this episode, so for the show notes, we'll put in links to your website, and I'm sure you've got some social media as well that you'll want to share. So I'll just share the episode number as well. So that's at globaltravelplanning.com/episode 79. But before we sign off, Julie, would you just like to share with our listeners where they can find you?
Yes. So my website is juliedawnfox.com. So the Dawn, just in case some people don't know how to spell that, so that's DAWN.
Perfect. And are you also on Instagram and things like that? I believe you like taking photos. Are you a photographer?
I do enjoy taking photos, but to be honest, I'm not very active on Instagram. So you'll find some stuff, but it's not really the main place to sort of go for updates or anything, I have to admit. My website, and also on my newsletter, that's kind of where I share what I'm doing. And
Perfect. Well, I'll put a link to your website where I'm sure if they go on the website, they'll be able to sign up for your newsletter and find out all about what you're up to and how they can get help if they're planning a trip to Portugal, and obviously all your resources that you've got available there for planning. But for this week, Julie, it's been absolutely fantastic to talk about Portugal. It's a wonderful place to visit. As I say, we went this year and thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wish I'd spoken to you beforehand. So that's all I can say. But thanks so much for coming on this week's episode of the Global Travel Planner Podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Global Travel Planning Podcast. For more details and links to everything we discussed today, check out the show notes at globaltravelplanning.com. Remember, if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on your favourite podcast app, because your feedback helps us reach more travel enthusiasts just like you. Anyway, that leaves me to say, as always, happy global travel planning.